this has to be inputted into the matrix, not drawn out of the matrix. You don't pull this out of the matrix. This comes from the Word of God to let you know that in eternity you were saved. And this is our ministry, is that we input this into the matrix. When were you saved? In eternity. Now, Deacon Gavin is going to come at this time, pull out from your packet. What influence does the actualization of salvation in eternity exert on the eternal doctrines of grace? What influence is in your packet? What influence does the actualization of salvation, where? In eternity, exert on the eternal doctrines of grace? Now, even those who claim to be grace, sovereign grace enthusiasts and teachers, I said to you, and more importantly, the scriptures teach that salvation is eternal. And it must be viewed from eternity. And as you look at the doctrines of salvation, they must all be viewed as eternal doctrines. Justification is eternal. So when you say justification, you have to say eternal justification. All right, at this time, let us receive Deacon Gavin, who shall take us through the excerpt from this document. And I must say that the complete document is on the way up in our Doctrinal Discourse section, and even as you go into our conference section, there will be icons there where you can get the total entire document. All right, this time let us receive Deacon Howard Gavin.
Amen. From this document entitled, "What Influence Does the Actualization of Salvation, Its Origin, where it became reality, the actualization of salvation in eternity," that's where, "exert on the eternal doctrines of grace." It is crucial to the subject of salvation to solidly establish the utility or essentiality and usefulness of the eternal doctrines of grace. These doctrines are continuously lightly esteemed and are constantly under attack as being less than useful or even deemed downright counterproductive in the ministry of so-called evangelism. Quite often, the position is espoused that such doctrines, if they are taught at all, should be reserved for those already converted. They are treated as intellectual facts, which have little, if any, practical value in winning the lost to Christ. Yet, a thorough comprehension of these eternal doctrines conduce, or that is promote or help to bring about, that the very opposite is true. Not only are these precious truths useful in scriptural evangelization, but they are the precise antidote to the poisonous errors that grip most of Orthodox Christianity in this day. First, it must be understood from the outset that it is not the humanly perceived usefulness of any truth that qualifies such for dissemination. The appropriate dispensational whole counsel of God, referencing that from Acts 20:27, is to be taught and proclaimed for no other reason than that it is in fact the whole counsel of God. In proclaiming what is true about God and his eternal relationship with his elect, supposedly, if that supposedly drives anyone away, it still ought to be proclaimed, as God is truth and every man a liar, referencing Romans 3 and 4. Unfortunately, the sovereignty of God's grace is mostly militated against by some in error because of their zeal to preserve and proclaim the so-called doctrine of human responsibility. A purely scriptural assessment immediately recognizes the fact that the major problem confronting the evangelical community of today is that an entire generation has cut its teeth on the idea that mankind can be saved at any time, any place, and almost in any way through his contribution of some gesture or conscience to salvation. Hence, one's belief of the gospel has taken on the greater inference of a catalyst or determinant of salvation rather than merely God's process of manifesting in time what he has exclusively actualized or brought into being on behalf of his elect in eternity. In this sense, the terminology human responsibility dangerously takes on the symbolical form of human contribution, which actually aids and abets the haughty, prideful spirit of synergism. Here it is crucial to reject this unscriptural yet predominantly traditional doctrine of misperception in the greater sectors of orthodoxy, as one is granted a teachable spirit in the comprehension of God's eternal enactment of salvation. Rightly divided scriptures are definitively the exclusive authority not only for the doctrinal beliefs, but also for the teachings utilized in Christian evangelism. Is mankind spiritually dead or alive? Total depravity. That is, the total inability of any to render that which is righteous and acceptable to God. Total depravity. Doctrinally, the evangelical utility of total human inability must be enthusiastically employed in consideration of the fact that, in a nutshell, every faculty of man's ability is mitigated by his sinfully depraved nature. This engenders the entire structure of humanity or mankind, inclusive of his mind, heart, and especially his will, because he is in a state of utter and complete inability to comply with or participate in any part of the righteous proceedings of God's salvation requisites. Here it must be tersely or briefly conveyed and understood that mankind's problem is far deeper than that he simply will not comply. Compliance versus non-compliance is neither a matter that one is spiritually injured nor spiritually sick, but spiritually dead, resulting in a condition which can only be described by the words cannot. We cannot. Does this mean that he does not have a free will? Of course he has. He will freely function in the attenuated state of depravity of those who are dead in trespasses and sins according to his designed nature. In the kingdom gospel, Jesus states that it is the nature of the tree that determines the nature of the fruit, referencing Matthew 7:17 and through 18. In like manner, mankind's depraved nature will determine the nature of his choices unless such has been determinately overruled. Therefore, even though the kingdom scriptures declare that a lost man must be born again, they just as clearly declare that such new birth occurred by the sovereign will of God, not the free will of man. Reference and look at John 1:13. Though they declare that men must come to Christ to manifestly be saved, they just as clearly declare that none can come unless God has effectually drawn them. Look at John 6:44 and 45. The grace gospel and doctrine definitively declare that certain designated ones manifestly believe on Christ in testimony of their salvation, as it clearly declares that the faith or faithfulness that saved these souls belongs to Christ, and the faith, or rather better, faithfulness granted to his elect is a gift of God's grace for the exclusive purpose of the revelation and or manifestation of their salvation. Referencing Ephesians 2, verse 8 and 9, and Philippians 1:29. Thus it declares that manifestly the natural man does not receive the things of the Spirit of God, for to him they are foolishness, and he is not able to know them because spiritually they are discerned. Referencing 1 Corinthians 2:14. Those that revile against the doctrine of the sovereign grace of God in election of individuals to salvation mostly attempt to assail it by simply labeling it Calvinism in lieu of considering its scriptural merits. Their view of the conferment of salvation is couched in the language of the following illustration. Salvation works like this. Lost men are in a condition like a sick man in a bed dying of some disease. Many Christians look at it like this. Christ is like the antibiotic which God has placed on the nightstand next to him. The message of the gospel is that if only he will reach out to the nightstand and take the medicine, he'll be saved. The focal problem with this scenario is its inconsistencies with rightly divided exegesis of the scriptures. Indeed, Jesus Christ is the exclusive medicine, antidote, and remedy for mankind's deliverance from the curse and penalty for his sinful nature. However, the illusionary perception that God has set Christ before and commanded all of depraved mankind to make a choice to embrace him fails to recognize the inability of those spiritually dead to respond to the edict. Hence, the entire illustration breaks down in this sense. If the sinful nature is analogous to sickness, an individual's will to choose or reject treatment is unreliable, since it is especially the will of the flesh that is sick. God bless.
Now again, as you look at this document, it is drawing its information and comprehension from the scriptures rightly divided. Rightly divided, first of all, from the grace covenant, the grace contract, that chart that we referred to before we went on break. Again, that chart is entitled The Visions of the Grace Covenant, which squarely takes salvation out of time, and in doing so, it takes it out of the providence, control, influence, determination of humanity. Also, it places salvation in the secure, abiding arena of eternality.